Hi, Imbolo.
Hi, David.
It's great to see you.
Great to see you too. Thank you so much for doing this with me.
Thank you. First, I want to thank Melanie and the Center for Fiction for having us and for everyone who's tuning in to help me and Random House celebrate uh, your second book, which came out today. It's in the world as of today. How Beautiful We Were. Um, before we start, I just have to tell you that I first read this novel a couple years ago, um, and I fell in love with it then. But in anticipation of tonight, I've been rereading it, and I am so struck by just how fantastic of a book it is, and how, in some ways, you've defied the second novel curse. You have grown as a writer, and you've told a story that is just is so exciting to read and so much to think about, to give us to think about. So congratulations, Imbolo. Lots of people in the world are loving it, including the New York Times Book Review, which has a lot to say about the book. I think it's this Sunday on the cover. So congratulations and welcome.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you so much, David.
you're welcome. I thought maybe to start our conversation tonight, we would talk about place.
hmm
This novel takes place in a village called Kosawa.
hmm
Tell us about that village. What is it in your mind? What do you see in your mind?
So Kosawa is it's a village in a fictional African country, and it is a fictional village. It's a place where there's a strong sense of community, and the family ties and the ties to the ancestors is very strong. And before the novel started, an American oil company had discovered oil in Kosawa, and through the process of exploring, drilling for this oil, they had um, they had caused a great deal of environmental degradation. And so when the novel starts, the children in the village are sick and dying from all the pollution in the village. So the rivers are covered with toxic waste, the pipelines are spilling, there's a lot of of pollution in the air. And so the children in the village are dying from all this. And we see the villagers who in a small in a country that is being ruled by dictatorship, so they don't exactly have a lot of access to the people who can help them. They've asked the government to help them, and nothing is really happening, and the oil company obviously is not really thinking about them. And we see the villagers, when the story starts, the villagers asking the oil company representatives to help them. And there's this strong sense of desperation to save their land, to grow old on their land. The children are talking about how much they want to grow old in their village, because this is a world where there isn't a desire, and this novel starts in 1980, so there isn't a big desire to leave your village and go live in a city or something. People want to hold on to their old ways, and so they are very desperate to preserve it. And so when the villagers decide to fight this oil company, it comes from that place of love, that place of connection, that place of devotion to their home and to their way of life. And so Kosawa, while it is just a physical place for them, it also is a very spiritual place for them. They have a very strong connection to the to their ancestors, and also to some form of divinity. They refer to the divine in there as the spirit. So it is not just about this piece of land, it is their connection to all what matters in life that pushes them to fight, and to try to hold on to their village.
You said there's a strong sense of desperation, but as you're saying, it's also a strong sense of community. There's a feeling for me when I read the book that the villagers, the people we get to know in the novel, as if they've been there forever, and
hmm
their ancestors have been there forever, and this land is what they know and what they love, as you say, and then this company comes and disrupts it and poisons everything, both literally and metaphorically.
hmm
um, tell us a little more about who's there. Who are these villagers?
So the story is focused on the on one family, the Nangi family, and the father of that family, his name is Malabo. He goes. He's the first person in the village who decides to do something. He decides that my children are dying. Have been dying for too long. I'm going to do something um, about making this corporation stop. And without giving a lot away too much of the plot, that kicks off a lot of things that would later happen in the village, and that affects his entire family because his choice makes, it comes with very severe consequences. And Malabo's daughter Tula is at the center of the story because she eventually takes up the fight that her father started. But it is not only Tula, it's also Tula and the children who were born the same year as her. So um, Tula, when the story is told from a um, um, plural voice of Tula's friends speaking, and there's also chapters where the family of Tula also speaks. So it is a story that is very much about a family, about a community, and it's also about Tula, this young girl who grows up to be the leader of the fight to make this all coming stop. And it's also about this struggle, which lasts for many, many years and decades. And it really affects this family in a very, very deep way. And it also affects the community because ultimately everybody in the community is affected one way or another by what this oil company is doing.
One of the things I admire the most about the book is what you were referring to in the we narrator, that the book is divided between sections that are narrated by the children of the village,
Mm-hmm.
the we, and they're narrating what they've seen, and they
Mm-hmm.
have a kind of a clarity that children tend to do.
Mm-hmm.
Adults sometimes we get
Right.
things get mixed up in our heads, but
Right.
kids can see things very clearly, and they're narrating from that perspective in
Right.
this collective wisdom and collective
Right.
love and this
Right.
collective sense of injustice.
Right. Right.
And then you have the other chapters with the family members narrating their pieces of the story, and it's so brilliantly structured, and it's also very from a craft point of view, it's a
Right.
complicated thing to pull off. I would love you to talk about how you got to this structure and
Right.
shaping the book this way, because the story is really central, obviously, to the read, but the way you tell it is
Right.
really important to how we experience what's happening and who these people are.
Right. Yeah. I mean that, and I should start off by saying that I wrote this book over the course of so many years. Right. I started writing it in 2002, and I finished 2019, and it's coming out 2021. And when I started it, it was not that structure. When I started, it was Tula, the young girl, just telling the whole story. But it just wasn't quite working. Right. I knew that something was missing, and ultimately I realized that the children had to tell the story because they were the ones who were going to inherit this village,
Yeah.
right? Even though at the beginning it's the adults who are fighting, it was important to show what it's like to be a child in such a situation. And I was also very much inspired, and not inspired, I don't know what inspired is a word, but I was quite devastated and heartbroken about certain events that had happened in the news that had to do with children, and specifically Flint, Michigan, and Sandy Hook.
Mhm.
And I was thinking about what it's like to be a child in a world in which you cannot understand why certain things are happening to people like you. Why are we being given? Why are we being allowed to drink poison water? And why is an oil company destroying the land in which we were supposed to grow up in? So like you said, is that innocence, that desperation to make sense of the world, which I also had as a child, right? I was the kind of child who was always, struggling to understand the whys of the world, and that might be because I also read a lot of books. So I wanted to tell the student of the children, but I also knew that I had to also really talk about Tula, because Tula
Mm.
is very much at the center of the story, and it was important to show like where she came from, her family, and what her choices and her father's choices had affected her also. But it was also important to show how a choice like fighting an American oil company, fighting any powerful entity, how such a choice devastates families, because that was a really, really terrible price that Tula's father, knew he was going to have to make his family pay when he decided to do something about this oil company. And ultimately, Tula had to continue the fight. And so this wasn't one person deciding, I'm going to sue an American oil company. It was about a family saying, I'm going to make this decision to fight this oil company, and my family is going to come along for this fight one way or another. And it was important that the children who we're going to inherit this village, right? Because the adults, at some point their time is going to be gone. But these children, we're going to be forced to stay in this village and forced to deal with the consequences. I realized that for me to really explore the full scope of this struggle, the full scope of what was involved in the battle, I had to start with the children from the beginning, when they realized where they were living, what was going on, to the very end when they had to deal with the consequences of this struggle.
This might be a good point where, do you want to read us a couple of paragraphs from the book just to give,
Sure.
give people a taste of this narrative voice that we're talking about? And
Yeah, so I am going to read the beginning because it's right in the beginning, and this is the children of the village who they do most of the speaking in the book. So they start off, basically give an introduction to what the story is about. So this is right at the beginning of How Beautiful We Were. We should have known the end was near. How could we not have known? When the sky began to pour acid and rivers began to turn green, we should have known our land would soon be dead. Then again, how could we have known when they didn't want us to know? When we began to wobble and stagger, tumbling and snapping like feeble little branches, they told us it would soon be over, that we would all be well in no time. They asked us to come to village meetings to talk about it. They told us we had to trust them. We should have spat in their faces, heaped upon them names most befitting: liars, savages, unscrupulous, evil. We should have cursed their mothers and their grandmothers, flung pejoratives upon their fathers, prayed for unspeakable calamities to befall their children. We hated them and we hated their meetings, but we attended all of them. Every 8 weeks, we went to the village square to listen to them. We were dying, we were helpless, we were afraid. Those meetings were our only chance at salvation. We ran home from school on the appointed days, eager to complete our chores so we would miss not one word at the assembly. We fetched water from the well, chased goats and chicken around our compounds into bamboo bands, swept away leaves and twigs scattered across our front yards. We washed iron pots and piles of bowls after dinner, left our huts many minutes before the time the meeting was called for. We wanted to get there before they strode into the square in their fine suits and polished shoes. Our mothers hurried to the square too, as did our fathers. They left their work unfinished in the forest beyond the big river, their palms and bare feet dusted with poison earth. The work will be there waiting for us tomorrow, our father said to us. We will only have so many opportunities to hear what the men from Pexton have to say. Even when their bodies bore little strength, after hours of toiling beneath a sun both benevolent and cruel, they went to the meetings because we all had to be at the meetings. The only person who did not attend the meetings was Konga, our village madman. Konga, who had no awareness of our suffering and lived without fears of what was and what was to come. He slept in the school compound as we hurried along, snoring and slobbering if he wasn't tossing, itching, muttering, eyes closed. Trapped as he was, alone in a world in which spirits ruled and men were powerless under their dominion, he knew nothing about Pexton.
there's a it to me, your prose here just feels timeless. There's a real classical
Thank you, David.
sound to it. The purity of the language. There's a musicality to it. We could hear it in your reading right there. Where does that come from?
Well, I think that, and a lot of, the way this is first of all my original voice of writing. This is just how I always write. And it's funny because my first novel was very hard for me to write because it was not very natural as much as this one was. But I will say that this I had a religious upbringing and I grew up reading the Bible. and and there's a certain biblical way of telling stories, right? Everything was like, oh, and therefore, and thus far, and everything. There was a certain, like, if you read the King James Bible in the Old Testament, and that kind of voice, I think that followed me. So I tend to, and even when you look at this book, if you, there's certain passages, there's certain things that the character says, which are like Bible verses, because when you grow, when you have a religious upbringing and you raised, memorizing all these Bible verses, it sort of follows you into your work, at least for me, and I find myself thinking and writing in the same way that biblical stories are written.
Was there a story from the Bible that meant a lot to you as a girl? One that thrilled you, scared you, inspired you?
Well, there were so many, but I'll say that the idea of revolutions and revolutionary, because Tula, the main character in this novel, becomes a revolutionary. I think that had something to do with me always looking at, at, at Jesus Christ, right? We were seeing it as this Messiah, and always thinking that he was also a revolutionary in a sense. All my life, I've been fascinated by people who are determined to overthrow systems of injustice. And even though I grew up to question a lot of stuff in the Bible, I still have this fascination with Jesus Christ as a revolutionary, as somebody who came and said, I don't like this injustice. I'm going to, put an end to it. And I mean, what he said, his revolution was love, right? He came and said, we're going to do things differently. We're going to love each other. And so while Tula was inspired by a lot of the 20th century great revolutionaries, so I studied a lot and I read a lot about, the Dr. Kings and Mandelas and Gandhis and Malcolm X. I put a lot of them into Tula. I also realized that having that biblical foundation, helped shape this story a lot more than I actually appreciated until I got to the end and I realized, wow, this really has a lot of the way I think as far as questioning the world, right? It has a lot of, like, the very Egyptian Old Testament Israelites trying to escape captivity. Like, the Bible is very full of, the Jewish people trying to escape, from something and a better life, and they're always moving and they always have oppressors. So, and there's always this quality of freedom because the Bible, the Old Testament is very much about the Jewish people. It's always about freedom. So that definitely, I think it played a big role in this story. And also coming to America, I found myself being very fascinated by, as a people, the African Americans. Right? There's something about African American as a people that really is fascinating, how much they have been through and how the many different struggles and the many different leaders and they got here. So I think that I observed, I read books about African American struggle, and I put quite a bit of that into Kosawa and the struggle that they went through also.
Did you first learn about or discover America through books?
Yes, very much so. But mostly when I came to America, growing up, I mostly read African literature. And I would say that was also a big part of this book, because I grew up reading books about Africans who were trying to push back against colonialism, against dictatorships. One of my favorite African writers, he's not very well known in America, but he's a Kenyan writer, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and a lot of his books have to do with that, about people pushing back. I grew up reading a book by a Cameroonian writer named Kenjo Juba, and he wrote a book called White Man of God. And that is a book about religion coming to an African village and the African villagers, struggling to how to balance religion with their own ways. I also read a book called Footprints of Destiny, which was about some Cameroonians fighting German colonialism. So those are the kind of books that really interest me. So even though I came to America, and I said writers like Toni Morrison or Barbara Kingsova or Franzen were the ones who actually made me think, wow, I could actually try to write also. It was the African writers that really, I suppose, gave me the kind of um, the belief to write a book like this, because I had read as a child. I had read a book like this as a child. So it amazes me when people say, "Oh, African literature," they're all excited, because I read almost mostly African literature growing up, and a book like this book was not uncommon. It wasn't uncommon.
When you grew up in Limbe, which is on the coast, very different from from Kosala in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Um, where did you dream? What did you dream of as a child? Did you dream of being a writer and telling stories? Did you came to America as a young woman? Did you dream of coming to America? How did we get here?
No, I did not dream of. I did not dream of being a writer, David. I don't think many girls in Limbe dream of becoming writers. No, I did not. I had the opportunity to come to America, and I had relatives who were very kind to help me get here. But no, I think I thought I would probably be a school teacher. Something nice and safe. I definitely did not consider that. But yes, I think it's something about growing up in Limbe. Something about growing up in a place where we were the linguistic minority, and most people don't know that Cameroon is a bilingual country, and Limbe is in the English-speaking part of Cameroon, and most Cameroonians speak French. And so, growing up in Limbe, we did not have certain advantages. It wasn't the worst. It was a beautiful town, and I had a great life there. But we still live in a dictatorship, and that is something that also like had a big role in this book, because America was the first time that I really got to appreciate what it means to live in a free country. Because when you grow up in a dictatorship as a child, you don't even realize that, oh, dictatorship is not really the best way to go. You just realize, okay, we have the same president for what, almost 40 years now. That's just what it is. And they come to America, and then you see election every 4 years, and it really fascinates you. And that is something that also sort of happens to the character of Tula, because at some point she comes to America, and she gets to also see American democracy. And even though she understands, she sees that America definitely has its own flaws. That introduction to democracy is what gets the wheels in her head spinning, that she could do something similar in her country.
I think I remember a story that you've told of how important libraries have been to you or were to you when you first came to America and you first started reading American fiction, African American fiction, and I think there was a library in Virginia that you used to go to,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a wall of books, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell that story?
Yeah, that was how I got started writing, when I went to this public library in Virginia, and I saw Oprah book Club Pigs, and the first one I picked up was Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon. And I read that book, and I basically started writing after I finished reading that book. But again, I'll say that, while that book was the book that made me start go like, oh my God, I'm going to write, I'm going to tell a story too. And this is the story I began writing. I really was looking more to telling a story like the stories Ngugi wa Thiong'o told. I was looking to tell the stories more like the ones, Kenjo Juban told, these African writers that I grew up around, and that fascinated me. And so it was surprising to me that I ended up writing Behold the Dreamers, which I love that book, but I never thought I would write a book like Behold the Dreamers, because I had never identified as being an immigrant. But I had a very strong identity as an African, as somebody who had grown up in a post-colonial world, as somebody who was very sensitive to injustice, and somebody who thought about characters like the ones in How Beautiful We Were. But it ended up being a wonderful blessing, because putting this aside and writing Behold the Dreamers, which you did a wonderful job of editing.
I had a very easy job.
Whatever, you're too modest. That was such a joy, because it allowed me to do something different, something which I'd never imagined doing, was writing Behold the Dreamers. And then from there, I felt even freer to go back and continue writing this book.
I just want to say to the audience that we're going to start taking questions in a moment. So if you have any, please put them in the Q&A, which is what we're looking at, and we'll try to get to all of them. Um, I'm sure on this Zoom, you have a lot of fans of Behold the Dreamers. So I think I'd love to like take just one moment to talk about that book and that experience for you. Because we first met in 2014 when
That's right.
you had written Behold the Dreamers, and I read it in manuscript. Your agent sent it to me at Random House, and I fell in love with these characters of an immigrant couple from Cameroon and the 0.001% family they work for
Mm-hmm.
in New York City on the Upper East Side. And I thought I love these characters, I love this writing, but I also thought I love this mind. I like I'm I'm really drawn to the mind who created this world and these conflicts and who have a lot to say. But I'll never forget, Imbolo, when you came to Random House to talk about the book. You it was a very important time in your life. You went on to tell us a lot of things kind of came together in your life in that period. Do you want to pick it up from there?
Well, I suppose the biggest part was that, right? Was it that? Yes, I saw. I met you, and I'll never forget. It was September 30th. I met you on September 30th, and then 10 days later, I became an American citizen, and that was significant for me because I I suppose I it meant a lot for me to write this, to have this book come out as an American. I mean, I'd been in America for so many years by that point, and I wasn't a citizen, and so my citizenship was a huge deal. But yes, I mean, I'd also be trying to get my work published for a long time and been rejected left and right. And then finally, my wonderful agent, Susan Golom, who is somewhere over here, took a chance on me. And then she said, oh, I think there's a guy named David Ebershoff who is reading it right now and he may like it. So, and next thing you know, I met you. But yes, it was almost 7 years ago. Can you believe it? Oh my gosh.
Well, I can, but I mean, I hope you don't mind me adding. So you were also 9 months pregnant, I
Yeah,
believe,
oh God, I was so pregnant. I was so
and you had so you within a period of what 2 weeks you sold your first book to Random House. You became an American citizen, and you had a baby, right?
I was very pregnant. Yes. Oh my God. I remember because I remember I was doing the meeting. I was sweating. I was sweating so badly. I was like, oh God, I need you picked up all these paper towels and gave me because I was hot and sweaty.
That's not what I remember. I just remember kind of the confluence of all these events in your life, and feeling very lucky to be able to be a witness and something of a partner in you at this moment with you at this moment where lots of things are happening for you, and a lot of your future was a lot of like turning points were happening, and it reflected the spirit of that book of Behold the Dreamers, which is many things, but it's people who come to America. It's about people who believe there is a future for themselves, that they hold on to that. And
Right.
of course, the book is not a fairy tale,
Right.
which is one reason why I loved it, and I think also why other people love it. And that's also true with How Beautiful We Were. It's not a fairy tale. This is
Right.
life. You
Right.
tell it as it is, and the
Right.
complexities.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and that because I do appreciate that in literature. I mean, I am a reader. I like to say I am a reader who writes. I came to writing because I love books and because I thought, wow, I love reading and I'm going to also write. And I imagine I love writing, and I found out that I love writing also. But I am not interested in in telling stories and so that people can feel good or not feel good. Whatever way you feel, that is really not my concern, right? I mean, my concern is to tell the story honestly and do an excellent job at it. And I've had people come meet from stuff about Behold the Dreamers and say, "How could you? How could you?" And and I said, "I'm sorry, but that was." The story, right? I'm not God. I just tell the story. So but it is important to me that that I am honest. And this book also is very much about dreams. Right? It's about dreaming because the people in Kosawa, they have a dream. It's kind of like in Behold the Dreamers. They don't have any kind of crazy dream. Nobody wants to go to the moon or win $1 million. They just want to live a simple life in their village. Just like in Behold the Dreamers, they just want to be able to um, have a simple American life and afford the apartment and send their kids to school. So this and it's, I don't know if you remember, like back when we were working on Behold the Dreamers, we were struggling on the title for it. And one of the titles that I had, which thank God you didn't agree with, it was the title Ordinary Dreams. I'm like, the dreams are so ordinary. I'm like, that's not a good title. But it really is ordinary dreams that the characters in Behold the Dreamers had and the characters in How Beautiful We Were. They're just asking for simple things. And in both novels, the characters are fighting and striving and making very tough choices to get there. And it is part of all of our lives, and it is complex. Right? We make tough choices to get what we want, and we make sacrifices. And I am very interested in exploring that aspect of humans and why we choose to do what we do and the consequences of those decisions. Because this How Beautiful We Were is very much about consequences. I mean, characters make a lot of choices that they think are good in the beginning, and later they find out that maybe it wasn't the best choices, but they're so determined, right? They have this dream that we are going to beat this American oil company and get them out of our land and live on our land. But it ends up being very, very complex, situation for pretty much everybody involved.
That's one of the things that makes it such a rich read, is that the characters and How Beautiful We Were. It's not a story of oil company bad, villagers good. You
Right.
have you have you have the range of human behavior
Mhm, mhm.
among the villagers. We have people who are innocent and whose desires are pure, and then you have
Right,
people who are morally complicated and take the easy road, or go after the cash, or don't want to look.
right,
um, and but that's what gives us a story. That's what a story is.
right,
A bit ago in the conversation, you were talking about the Bible and Christ and love, and I was thinking of how there's a point in How Beautiful We Were fairly early on, where the children are speaking, and they're asking of the representatives of this oil company rhetorically, don't you have children? Like,
right,
wouldn't you
right,
want your children to have clean water
right,
and clean soil for their food? And really they're asking just to sort of love. They're
right,
asking for basic human love,
right,
and they're not getting it. And when people are confronted with that kind of full rejection of humanity, that's where revolutions begin, as you and
right, right,
that's what we see in this book.
right, right. And I think that a lot of the revolutionaries who inspired the character of Tula, that they were driven by love, right? Like talking about Jesus Christ being a revolutionary and his message was love. But if you think about the Dr. King, right, it was coming from a place of love. Like, we love you, love us too. We should all love each other. It was so simple, right? But it was that. And the other thing that I realized is that these revolutionaries and people who really changed the world, I mean, I read a lot of, I think of myself as a student of greatness, right? I read a lot about the people who are change makers. I read biographies on Lincoln and George Washington and Steve Jobs and, Wall Street executives, because I really wanted to understand a certain kind of mind that goes on and does something, almost crazy, like, fight an oil company. And I think that these people, they have a unique ability to hope. They really hope, they really believe that they're going to make a difference. They believe that they are going to change the world. That is why, you know people like Malcolm X and Dr. King, they died at 39. They were so young. They really believed that, I might be killed, but I'm going to do it because I really have hope. So that is why I think that this story is very much about hope. It's about people who, as crazy as it sounds, that an African village is fighting an American oil company, they really believe that we stand a chance. And so I have that fascination with this uncanny ability to hope to such an extent that you're willing to risk your life because you really believe that you know, your hard work and your belief will lead to something, to lead to change in your community.
Student of greatness. I love that. This might be a good time for us to turn to some audience questions. Okay, so I'll read them out. I have really terrible eyes, so I have to lean in. Excuse me. So, um, I, oh, sorry. Okay. Echoing David's comment about how classical the voice sounded in the passage Mbolo read, the cadence reminds me of Ashebe. Was things fall apart in influence?
It certainly was. We, I believe around 12 or 13-year-old, pretty much every African child has to read Things Fall Apart in school. And I loved Things Fall Apart, but I would say that Achebe's other novel, which is not very well known, it's called Ant Hills of the Savannah. That was a bigger influence on this particular novel. So I would recommend, if you love Things Fall Apart, check out Ant Hills of the Savannah.
We have a question about Behold the Dreamers, and it is about the ending.
Oh,
So
okay.
we have to make a group decision. Do we talk about the ending of a book that is, what, 4 years old?
Yeah, maybe we shouldn't, because I've had people go like, well, "How could you do that? I still haven't read it." So
I'm gonna like see, is there anything in that question that we can get?
can
It's a,
talk about it without talking about it.
yeah, there you go. So it's about, it's a question about choices that immigrants make.
Okay.
And is there anything you want to say about home?
Okay.
And yeah.
Okay. So without me really knowing the question, I'll say that yes, it is. This is a story about one particular family, right? This is about one family's making their own choice, and this is a story about one family deciding what home is, and that the leader of the family, I should say, because this is not so much about the whole family. It's the father of the family, and so nobody can tell you what home is, right? Nobody can tell you what achieving your dream looks like. Behold the Dreamers is a novel that, amongst many things, explores what is the American dream and what is your American dream and what does that American dream mean to you? How much are you willing to sacrifice for that dream? So and I have to say that, like, I sort of had the same kind of mindset, maybe because I started writing this book for Behold the Dreamers, that the issue of home is something that I think about a lot. I left my home country and I came here as a teenager, and I was for a long time struggled about finding a home, and I eventually found a home in New York City, which I am not physically there right now, but I consider New York City to be very much my home. So this novel also had to deal with what home means to you and how much you're willing to give up or take on, for the goal of preserving that home or creating a new home for yourself.
The next question is, Imbolo, could you tell us why it took so long for you to complete the book? What are some of the milestones of the process in the process?
Oh, good question. Why did it take me so long? Nobody needs to take this long to write a book. I should say that the length of how long it took to write the book doesn't really mean anything, because Zora Neale Hurston wrote The Eyes Are Watching God in 5 weeks, from what I understand. And Margaret, I know, Margaret Atwood wrote The Handmaid's Tale in 18 months. So people write really great books in 1 month or 5 months. I'm not one of those people. But it took me a while because I had I didn't quite I wasn't equipped to write this story when I started. Was nowhere ready to write this story.
Mhm.
I needed to grow a lot as a person. I needed to grow a lot as a writer. I needed to somewhat understand the world and question the world. There's a lot of research that needed to be done. And when I started writing this, I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm going to be a novelist. I wasn't thinking that. I was thinking, I'm going to write this story as a hobby. And in the meantime, I'm going to get myself a nice real job. So most of the time when I was writing this novel, when I started, I had regular jobs. I worked at a nonprofit, I worked at a media company, and so it wasn't something that I was thinking, oh, let me rush up and finish this thing. There was no plan to publish it, right? For the first 9 years, it was just me enjoying myself. And then I put it aside. So when I went back to it in 2016, that was when I actually thought, okay, now I am really, really going to finish writing this. And then that took 3 years. So they had that first, 14 years was me just exploring and thinking, oh, there's this idea I have. Let me just, write it and have fun with it. It was only when I finished writing Behold the Dreamers that I felt like I believe I have what it takes to finish this novel now.
There's a poem in, speaking of home, there's a poem in Behold the Dreamers, right? Tell us the story of that.
Yeah, so
Give us the context of that poem in the book and
yes.
how it connects to how beautiful we were.
Yeah, so there's a poem in Behold the Dreamers where the characters of Clark Edwards and Jende Jonga, they're sitting, I guess, at the pier in the West Village. They're watching the sunset, right? That's the best decision. They're watching the sunset, and Clark Edwards reads to Jende a poem about home. And I think it says something about home will never go away. Home will be here when you get back. You may go to escape something, or you may come back. But no matter what happens, know that home will always be here for you. And that was a poem that Clark had written because his son Vince had left home to move to India. Well, that poem was actually a song that was sung to the character of Tula in How Beautiful We Were when she was about to move to go to America. So her community was telling her, like, okay, go to America, but when you come back, you know that your home will be here. But of course, when I was writing Behold the Dreamers, I was thinking this novel is dead. I'm never going to finish it. I must just, take out something for me. So I just took out that instead of writing a whole new poem for Clark, I just took out a poem and I put it in Behold the Dreamers, made it from a song into a poem. And of course, I couldn't have a new song. I was like, you know what, Tula doesn't need a song. I'm going to America. But yeah, that is what happened. So I really thought that this novel was gone and done. I took an excerpt from it and I made it into my first short story, MK, which was published by Three Penny Review. I basically just, felt like I'm just going to chop up the thing and make it into short stories and forget about it. But of course, the reason why I couldn't was because I couldn't get away with that. The story just kept on grabbing me and saying, you're going to finish it. Yeah, so that is the origin of that poem, that I stole it from one book and put it in another book.
I think when I read that poem in the manuscript, that's when I felt this very strong feeling that I was going to edit that book. Because I was in the West Village when I was reading the manuscript, and I was looking at that pier while I was reading, and I was I was reading the scene of the two of them sitting there, of Clark Edwards sitting there, and thinking through these ideas of home and the poem, and I was literally looking at that spot.
That's funny.
That was that feeling of like, okay, I want this to happen. We have lots more questions, so let me see what we have here. Hi, Imbolo. Mercy here from Addis Ababa. We have
hi, Mercy.
Yeah, thank you very much for tuning in. I love the introduction you read. Sorry, my eyesight is terrible. It's vivid and I can't wait to read more. I love the title. You mentioned in a reading I attended in Manhattan that you had a manuscript about a fictitious country that you'd kept in your computer. Is How Beautiful We Are that manuscript?
Yes, thank you. So I should mention, because I met Mercy. Mercy came to two of my events on two consecutive nights. So she was visiting New York City and she came to one event, and the next night she said, I need to hear more. And then she coming to this one. But I guess I didn't realize I mentioned it publicly. But yes, I mentioned that, I had this story, and this is the story. Yes, I really, I guess at that point, because my book came out Biology Must came out in August 2016. And I think I went back to this story in September 2016, so right away. So I guess I knew by then, when that was like October, November, that I had to go back to the story. Um, and it just I couldn't I just there was nowhere else for me to go. I couldn't help it. I had to finish it.
Thank you, Mercy, for tuning in. It's probably a little late there.
Mhm.
Let's see. I was um, okay. Uh, One of the aspects that fascinated me about How Beautiful We Were is the naming that takes place. I realized that the characters are bearing names of cities in Africa, including Juba, Sahel, Kudi, Lusaka, and Bamako. What is the message tied to the naming, if any?
That must be somebody who knows Africa very well.
Yes.
It is yes, I love when people name their children after places. You know, I mean, there's also a character name after an American city, Austin. Um, I love the name Paris. I love the name Brooklyn. I love, people naming their children after cities. So that was the same thing. Why, to me, Malabo is a beautiful name. I mean, Malabo is also the capital of Equatorial Guinea, which is very close to Cameroon. Lusaka is the capital of Zambia, and that's also, it's a beautiful name. Why not? Why not? Why, if people can name their children Memphis and Austin and Brooklyn, why not Lusaka and Tunis?
Right. Good evening. How did you channel the anger of these children when they are confronting the company in the town hall meeting?
Mm. Well, I mean, I think we all know how it feels, right? To feel as if your government is letting you down, or some corporation is letting you down, or some powerful entity is letting you down. It's that same anger. I mean, this also, I should add that I was writing this in 2016, which was a time when there was quite a bit of anger in this country.
Yeah.
So that wasn't very hard because there was there's so much tension and anger, and there were all these movements, and standing rock was happening, and women's march was happening, and Black Lives Matters, and there was so much, frustration about inequalities and injustice, and so the moment also gave me so much. Right?
Mhm.
Writing in Finishing the book in 2016 to 2019 was almost like an unbelievable window for me to do that, because all around me I saw so much that basically just allowed me to really get into the minds of the characters.
You grew up in Limbe, which has the only oil refinery in Cameroon. How did your experience growing up in Limbe shape your construction of the plot? Excuse me.
Of the plot.
Yeah.
Well, I think the Limbe element is not the oil refinery is an issue, because again, I grew up in a town that had oil refinery, and so I was aware of the politics of oil, because even as a child, I used to hear the adults complaining about how nobody from Limbe could get a job at the oil refinery, because it was, you needed connections to the elite to get a job there, and it was difficult. And so I knew that part, and I thought that was quite sad and disturbing. Um, but the bigger part was that back in, I believe it was the 90s in Cameroon, there was a little movements coming out to do something about the struggle of the Anglophones. So there were people who were trying to push the dictatorship to be to treat the Anglophone um, population a bit more um, kinder. So I think that being a linguistic minority, not so much growing up in Limbe, but growing up in Anglophone Cameroon was a big part, because there was so much there was so much our freedoms were so suppressed. Again, as a child, it wasn't that evident unless you were a child like me who was always thinking about these things. But I was aware of our struggle as Anglophone Cameroonians, and I think that awareness helped me somewhat develop the character of Tula.
Mhm. We have a question. How far were you in your writing process of How Beautiful We Were before you decided to change the story to tell it from the children's perspective?
Oh, I didn't start the children's perspective till 2016. So I had been writing it the whole. excuse me, the whole time I was writing it, it was always Tula, just Tula's perspective. Tula was basically telling the whole story. It was when I went back in 2016, and like I said, I had been affected by, very much disturbed by events in America that affected children, that I started thinking about what if this story was told by children. And
Right.
i.e. Sandy Hook and Flint, Michigan, I decided to just make the children the primary voice.
Was it challenging the third person plural, the verbs, and there's all sorts, you kind of you cut off certain linguistic options, right, about what
Right,
you, how sentences that you can't write because of the
right.
voice.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it comes with these challenges, right? That's the reason why I don't see many books reading in the first person plural, because it does, it doesn't give you a lot of wiggle room. You have a whole group of people who are very different in many ways, speaking as one. But I loved it. I really did. I enjoyed it, and I have to give a ton of credit to the great writer Julius Suka, because she was the one who um, wrote a book that I saw, and I thought, oh my God, you could do this. And that book, of course, is The Buddha in the Attic.
Right.
I read that book, and I was blown away. And unlike my book, the whole book is in the first person plural, the whole book. And I was so blown away. And so when I went back and I started writing the book, and it just stayed in the first person plural. I couldn't change it. It kept on being the whole thing. And I was like, okay, I'll just stick with it, because like that sentence, the first sentence, we should have known the end was near. That was the first sentence from way back 15 years ago. That was always the first sentence. And so I was like, okay, let me just keep on doing this. And next thing you know, the whole thing is just saying in the first person plural.
I love that book by Julie.
It's a great book.
It's um, one of the things that I read it in a book club, but one of the things that's so remarkable is that even though it is in the first person plural, she still manages to have individual characters come through.
Yes,
And so you
yes,
have a sense of these women who come from Japan, right?
right.
They're I guess what was once called mail order brides, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And they come to the West Coast of the United States. This is the early part of the 20th century, um, and we have a sense of their collective experience,
mm-hmm.
while also having a sense of very specific experiences of specific women, and it's just masterful.
It is. It's such a great book. It really was an inspiration. And I just want to also say that, when we talk about, you know, like when I look at the movements that inspired this novel, I think specifically about the anti-apartheid movement and the civil rights movement, right? Most of the time we think about the group of people, like everybody involved in that movement. Like, yes, we know certain names because they were the leaders, they're more prominent. But I was thinking about like the movement as one, the struggle as one, and everybody involved as one. And the first person plural just made sense. But I also knew that I had to balance it by zooming in a little bit more to say Tula or her mother or her grandmother, her brother, to say, okay, this is really like what it took on a deeper level. Take away from the community level, look what it took on a personal level to be involved in such a struggle.
Imbolo, have you been back to Cameroon as a writer? I'm very curious what that experience is, and how you how people at home, whether it's family and friends or Cameroonians, see you, and how you feel about being this very successful writer. You're not. I know you well enough as a writer that you don't. I believe you don't represent anybody but yourself and your stories you're telling. But I
Right.
would imagine there's some pressure or excitement among Cameroonians to see one of their own achieve this level of success and tell stories that are very relevant to
Mm.
their lives.
Well, I mean, it is. I would say that I've had incredible amount of support from my fellow Cameroonian writers and Cameroonians in general. I just, because I didn't come from the Cameroonian literary, circle, right? Because there was this in every country they policy a literary circle. I didn't come from there. I was living in New York City, and I wrote a book in my living room, and then I walked to Random House, and the book was sold, and it was different from a lot of other parts. But it's been nothing but tremendous support and encouragement. And it just means a lot to me because it is a wonderful country. It is a beautiful country that many people don't know about, and I'm so glad that that you know our work from probably my country gets noticed. I mean, most people don't know that a Cameroonian writer in France won a major award there. I believe it's the Prix Goncourt, I believe. She
Mhm.
won a major award there. There's also a great Cameroonian writer, Patrice Nganang, who also is a great writer from French Cameroon. So I am far from being the only Cameroonian writer writing out in the West, but it's been a privilege to at least introduce people to even though Kosawa is not in Cameroon, it very much is inspired by it has inspired by events in Cameroon, and Behold a Dreamer certainly is about Cameroonians. So that definitely is a big thing to me.
We have somebody in our audience. Joy says she represents the Cameroon support system here, and she also says we are proud of Imbolo.
Yeah, thank you, Joyce. Thank you.
We have one more question, and then I think we probably should wrap up. I'm wondering if there's a particular significance for you in writing about a fictional village, especially since the extractive force of the American Oil Corporation, sorry, and what you've been saying about the violence children are subjected to suggest a really important environmental focus for you in the novel. Is there some kind of narrative freedom in writing about the speculative space?
That's a big question. I'm not sure. I mean, I guess he's asking why I choose to make the village fictional, maybe.
Yeah. And does it, by not pinning it down to a map, do you
Right, right.
open something up or give you a kind of freedom?
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, well, it's this story had I had inspirations from so many places. There was even the history of the country, right? It didn't fit into any particular place. So I definitely, yes, there was an element of freedom there because if you throw in the environmental angle and the dictatorship angle and a place like Kosawa, the culture there and certain things about their custom, it didn't fit in any particular place I knew. When I first started this novel, I would say that Kosawa was on the coast, quite like Limbe, because I grew up in the coast, and I was like, well, of course, he has to be located like where Limbe is. And when I came back to it in 2016, I moved it from the coast and put it really inside the country because I just knew that I couldn't force it to be in the location of Limbe and create a fictional village where Limbe is. I wanted it to have its own space. Um, and that definitely gave me the freedom to 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 also create a culture because I am a fan of anthropology. I love when writers, and one of my favorite books from recent years was Euphoria by Lily
Mhm.
King, and that's a book that created. I mean, it was just such a beautiful celebration of cultures, and I also love Hanya Yanagihara's The People in the Trees,
Yeah.
which she thanked you in it, because I was reading the acknowledgements. But that's also a book that was about culture, and so I love books that have to do with
I didn't
culture.
know
And so,
that.
what?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, she did. She's like, I like. So I love that book. I just read it recently. I was like, oh my god, I just love this book so much. But so that I guess even though it wasn't like conscious, I guess I wanted to be free to create a culture also, and having a fictional place allowed me to create my own African culture. Like a place where people give their children names of African cities, for example.
That makes so much sense to me. It just allows you to tell the story that is coming up through your imagination and through your knowledge,
Mhm.
and not have to fact check. You know what you want to say, and
Right,
this world, and you
right.
have the language for it. So it makes a lot of sense that, because on the page the place feels, as I said earlier, as if it's been there forever.
Right. And I
And
have to ask you, David, because what you loved about Behold the Dreamers was that it was very specific, right? It was about people from Limbe, from Cameroon. And you said to me, I remember, like, this is so specific. I love how you have a very specific place. And this is opposite, right? So
I disagree. I mean, I think it's specific. It's not specific to a actual place, but the
Right,
specifics of the place. It's very vivid in my mind.
right.
Um, and what they're fighting for, I have a really strong sense of that. They're fighting for the place that is their home, the land that is their ancestral land, the land and the water, the land and the river that have fed and given them water
Hmm.
for centuries.
Right,
And this is a place that should have been their home for centuries more, if not for this company coming
right,
and acting with greed.
right.
We
So that,
have
I guess, my father was going to say that, like, so specific doesn't mean that it has to be a real place, right? It just has to be, it can be fictional, but it just has to be real. And it reminds me of something that Jan Martel said in one of his books, that, fiction doesn't have to be real, it just has to be true. So I
yeah.
guess the specificity has to do that it is true. It is, you connect to it as a place, whether or not it exists on the map.
Yeah, well, this book really rings true in so many ways to me. We have one final just shout out from Jackie. Congratulations, Imbolo. The book is magnificent with love from Douglas College.
Oh, thank you. Oh, that's the dean of my alma mater. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank you, David.
Thank you so much. Imbolo, it's so great to see you.
Same
I I wish we were all in person, um, but this is the next best.
here.
And congratulations on how beautiful we were. Congratulations on it arriving today after 19 years.
Oh, yes.
How are you celebrating today?
Well, I went for a hike. That's a good way to celebrate. No, I had a great day. I had a wonderful day, and it's also wonderful to do this with you. So thank you. I have a very very full month of March ahead of me. So I am going to have a good rest and prepare for tomorrow.
Great. Thank you so much. I want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight, and I want to thank Melanie and the Center for Fiction um, for having us. And I'm going to pass it over to the center to say goodnight and to sign off.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you, Mbola. Congratulations on this tremendous accomplishment. And I hope you all enjoy reading it. And yes, I do hope we all meet someday at the Center for Fiction. And until then, I hope everybody is well and good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good
Thanks,
night. Thank you,
Melanie.
everyone.